The Institute of Internal Auditors presents All Things Internal Audit. In this episode, Mike Levy talks with Dan Fornelius about the skills internal auditors need in 2026 and how to deliver real advice, insight, and foresight that leaders value. They discuss earning a seat at the table, balancing advisory work with independence, aligning audit work to strategy, and how AI and analytics are transforming internal audit. The conversation highlights the shift towards strategic, insight-driven auditing and what auditors must do to stay relevant.
Today, I think what we're trying to talk about is just how do we deliver value as internal auditors when we think about it in terms of, advice, insight, and foresight. So, at least for me, when I think about our profession, and you hear so many people talk about the Vision 2035, we have new standards, there's AI risks everywhere we look. Our role continues to evolve and change, but let's define it first. What do you think internal audit's role is when we think about advice, insight, foresight? How do we do that?
I think it's a few things. It's at the start, internal audit, right? They should have a seat at the table, whatever table that is. It could be various tables in an organization, but engaging early, right? With management and second line functions, on future events, emerging risks, AIs, on every discussion and every day, right? It's partnering with the management team. It's having that seat, partnering with that management team and providing that level of consulting and support back to the business aside from just assurance, right? If you're at the seat at the table, you're connecting with the business on what matters most in the organization, and then that'll allow internal audit to provide that foresight and some ideas on what might happen next.
Yeah, to your point, I think what's been interesting, I'm lucky that I get to talk to a lot of internal audit leaders, and people are still trying to define how to do this, and the seat at the table comment that you made. We all desire that, and to me, working through the types of tactical and strategic recommendations you can offer to management and how you do that outside of just the standard audit report, it's a bit of an art and a finesse. And I think to your point, it's one of the things that drives the seat at the table. And I think if we figure out how to do that properly, it's real meaningful. So when we talk about providing advice, give us some examples. What does that look like in practice? And how do you do that while you still maintain independence?
Helping the business navigate, right? How to navigate through uncertainty and risk. Not just reporting on issues, of course, reporting on issues, non-compliance, keeping the business aware of any, potential failures or risks or fines or what have you. But it all start with aligning on internal audits, strategic objectives and what they want to carry out, but aligning that with what's meaningful to the business, right? The business mission, their objectives, how the business is operating, and making sure that internal audit is aligning its work with the organization's strategic objectives. That'll really elevate its posture within an organization and the advice and the level of insight that they could provide. If they're aligned with the business, that maturity level and that trust level elevates even greater.
To your point about all of those things, I think aligning with company strategy is so important, but also I think aligning with the company's risk vocabulary and taxonomy that they're using to talk about risk and controls and findings. I found so many times there are ways to have that seat at the table is just, I had an organization once where we talked to them about risk and controls, but not in the context of how it impacted their business, just in the broad sense. And it didn't drive the value. And they sort of didn't want us part of the conversation because they felt like we were trying to make them do extra work. But then we started talking about it in terms of improvement and efficiency and protecting the company's value. And, we started to drive a lot more change just by simple vocabulary change. But I agree with you completely that company strategy and making sure the internal audit program and plan, whether it's advisory projects or assurance projects, is the most important thing. How would you respond? Because one of the things I hear all the time related to this is we can't do that. And we can't do that while maintaining the lines of independence, right? If we're doing advisory services work, does that cross the line into management decision-making? What's your response to that in terms of advising clients and driving that seat at the table, but not impacting our independence?
Providing that level of advisory or consulting back to the business really, really elevates internal audit as their posture within the organization, but elevates their level of trust. I mean, once you're advising on leading practices, keeping that line drawn where you're not influencing decisions, but you're providing a level of advice and counsel back to the business, and whether that's on a future product that's being rolled out and there needs to be programs or practices or technologies in place, and internal audit at least having a voice and having that seat at the table throughout, when there are future changes being made to an organization. I mean, internal audit should be involved. To whatever level of voice they have will vary, but there should be some level of influence or advisory or guidance back to the business. Where I feel it's most important for internal audit to be involved is really providing that level of guidance back to the business, basing their maturity on a different product or program. And you're really not influencing decisions. You're really influencing how the business should think about risk and where they stand in an environment, right? And that will then help them evolve their risk management practices and governance practices. And then in turn, internal audits practices will be much more strengthened because it's assessing a much more mature environment. It's providing that level of advice and that level of guidance without influencing any decisions to be made by management, right? But then also one other thing that could be done is, providing that level of support back to the business, right? Benchmarking them to peers, or providing that level of current state process documentation, or advising them on governance practices. So that can be provided back, and it really does help the stature and posture of internal audit within an organization.
Everything you just said is spot on. And I don't like when people use the concern of independence as a reason why they can't have a seat at the table. And my opinion, and what I always say to management when they ask about this is I tend to focus a lot more on objectivity, and I think that's critically important. But I also think that if management's asking for help, yes, we always will have a role, and you have to do this in concert with our standards and with the charter and with your audit committees and your executive management team. But I don't want to be the one that says, no, I can't help because I need to be independent. I think there are ways. We always have to make sure we manage the conversation, and we don't want to cross over and be acting as management. We absolutely have to manage that. But if someone's asking us for help, there are often ways we can find to help them that drive value. And all of those things, especially the low-hanging fruit areas, if you find quick wins in that, it drives so much value for them that, the worst thing you can say is, I can't do that. I have to remain independent. And honestly, with so much change happening, to your point, Dan, take AI as an example. Are we going to wait until a company fully adopts AI before we go give them advice on risk and control, or help make recommendations on ways that they can use that and adopt it to increase the value? Our job is to try to protect the organizational value and spotlight issues, and we have a really unique perspective in all of that. So I just don't like when people use independence as sort of the crutch for why they can't get things done. And I think it's a blocker in how we develop and deliver some of these pieces of advice and insight.
Yeah, it is the easiest out for internal audit to be outed from work stream, initiative, activity. You say the word independence, it takes some socializing and some trust between internal audit and other management team members, and really corral them or socialize them and explain that, no, this is not, and if it's not an independence issue, or okay, you feel like it is, let's adjust our delivery a bit and make it most meaningful to the business without having a perceived conflict, right?
What do you think we can do around like real-time guidance and monitoring and managing risk so that we are bringing that stuff to the forefront for management? Because I see that as another opportunity where we can deliver a lot of value early in the process.
Whether it's a new technology or AI, if it's being considered early on and being rolled out to an organization, how it's impacting production and operations, internal audit should at least be tangentially there to understand its impact. So it could voice out a key risk or work with second line on appropriate risk management or governance practices, and really reflect how the business should operate today. Many times, to your point, I mean, a technology may be implemented in internal audit, or a compliance function may not go in and assess it until over a year later. And these days, a year ago, we were not using AI like we were a year ago. I mean, it's flying by. So you can't wait a year to look at a new technology and assess its effectiveness. You need to be there today. And then really that'll then again elevate the stature of internal audit within a function and elevate its value, right?
I'm a firm believer that, and I have said this many times to management when we are challenged on that, because sometimes, like, to your point on the seat of the table, and, I've talked about this before on podcasts where we all want to seat at the table. Some management teams are really opening in terms of allowing this. Sometimes you have to sort of claw your way in. And one of the ways that I always talk about this is, why would you not want internal audit there, in the sense that, we're one of the few teams within an organization that really has the most holistic view of how an organization works, right? We're looking at risks, we're looking at controls across the whole environment, and we see everything. So because of that, it puts us in a really unique position to deliver some of that insight. So to your point, like, I know you mentioned AI as an example, and we'll talk. I definitely want to spend some more time talking about that. But just even the term insight, how do you define that with executives and internal audit? Like, so if I'm for everybody listening, if I'm a CAE, or even an internal audit manager on a team, or a staff person on a team, and I want to start building a program that's going to start delivering insights, right? Even outside of the audit reporting process, how do I even first, like, go, like, just like start defining insights within my company? Like, what does that look like? Is it just a external export of the audit report, or is it something we're seeing out in the media, or all the above? I mean, just like, well, where would you even start? Like, how do I define it, and where do you start?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you know what? I was we had a roundtable a couple weeks ago, and that was a topic. Of course, AI governance was a topic, but the next was risk. And in terms of going back to your point on a shared risk taxonomy, speaking the same language, meaning internal audit should be speaking the same language with its risk peers and with its operations teams. But in terms of, to your question on insight, that use of technology, it really becomes paramount to understanding insight back to the organization, because being able to fully collect any data point within an organization's ecosystem becomes huge, right? I was talking to someone, and they had a really interesting way to really understand an organization's taking their strategic objectives, taking their KPIs, right? Understanding what the business is accomplishing, but then also collecting as much data as possible. It was interesting. They had a campaign as an internal audit shop, right? And we do this day in and day out, right? We try to collect as much data as we can, system reports, KPIs, logs, outputs, but getting that data and doing something with it. And they had an interesting campaign. They went out to every department at once, well, not at once, but in certain areas, right? Certain timeframes, collected as much data as possible, grabbed all this information, tied this data to whatever KRIs are in place, right? For this to happen, their second line had to be pretty mature as well to do what they wanted to do. They tied as much data to different KRIs, right? To have an understanding, right? How the business is operating, where it could drift or underperform. And then what they did is they enhanced their KRIs with second line, working with them hand in hand, and then really understanding, like, the reliability of those data points, so leadership can trust those indicators. But then again, what to do with it? You need to have a fully functioning second line for this to work, and a lot of great resources on your analytics and technology teams, but turn that data into, like, patterns, trends, and, like, early warning signals. So internal audit will take this data, of course, and just like we do in our day to day, we use data to whatever degree we can and provide a level of assurance back. Run scripts, run different tests of that data, compare that data to different compliance requirements or leading practices, what have you, right? Or the execution of controls. But what they did was they also highlighted insights to, like, different cost, performance, or, like, different sort of impacts to their customers. And what they did was not only did they just hold that data for their assurance, they provided that data back to the business to provide like insights or suggestions to them on, hey, you have these reports available. You can use this in your at the front line and provide early warning signals back to the business, not wait for internal audit to catch it, right? Throw it back to the business and they could decide what they want to do with it, right? But it was that level of the business wasn't asking for this, right? Internal audit had a campaign and an initiative to really elevate the organization's attention to data, provided advice back to the business. And again, they weren't influencing, like to your point, there's no independence issue, right? They weren't influencing management's decision. They were saying, we have these 10 early warning signals that could be available in your system. They just have to be turned on or put into place. Do what you want with them. So it's getting that access to data and it's providing that level of advice back to the business where they might not even be asking for it, but that just then strengthens that relationship you may have with the business and elevates internal audit's role within the organization.
Well said. So, I mean, I think this is a perfect segue. So we've talked about AI abstractly, and we kind of referenced some of the technology solutions, obviously without endorsing any specific products or solutions. How do you view technology analytics? How can they assist from a storytelling perspective? And, if I'm an auditor trying to build this out and deliver more insights and be more proactive and have technology be part of that, what are some of the considerations I should think about?
With technology, in terms of storytelling, it's interesting. Every function, right? Whatever maturity level an organization's technology is in, internal audit should have that role and tell that story depending on wherever that organization is in terms of how mature they're using their technology. That would reflect the level of governance and oversight that should be in place, right? And I guess what internal audit should evaluate. Like if there's AI incorporated in a given technology, that will result in internal audit having to evaluate its outputs, its reports, and its decisions. And at the end of the day, whatever that technology is accomplishing, internal audit should make sure that it's reliable, it's appropriately governed, right? And that there's some validation in place across their models and the coding of that technology. And internal audit should assess the reliance and the governance around that technology. And providing that insight, it's only as strong as like the trustworthiness of those models and data within a technology, right? And I think it's important to understand that because without that, internal audit story can change. If it's not appropriately governed, internal audit story can be very narrowly focused. It could be somewhat backward looking. It may have some fixes that internal audit's really just providing assurance that the fixes were made, or it may become like caveated. They may carve out some scope because the technology is not fully implemented, right? So without that appropriate governance and maturity, internal audit story may not be as strong.
I also think we're living in a brave new world of technology. And what's really nice about this, if you're newly adopting this or trying to, frankly, have some pieces of this stuff in place and trying to be more forward looking and advance this, it's easier than ever to get started. So many data analytics tools and AI tools, even if you're just using AI assistant type tool, you pick your variety, whether it's AI assisted tool. And so many of them can deliver some of this. I mean, try putting some amount of data in and it'll start creating a Python script automatically for you to analyze it. So one of the nice things I think, when we try to be more forward looking and insight driven is you can start creating these like data models that look at different risk factors that are happening within your organization. And when you start correlating them and putting them together, all of a sudden you can look for trends or outliers that number one are going to help drive your audit plan, but it's really interesting and impactful to the business too. So I just think in this world of generative AI and some of the solutions that are out there now, both from a data analytics as well as from just a general tool perspective, you can do so much, even as a staff auditor that doesn't have any IT expertise or
Yeah,
any systems implemented. I just think we're in a brave new world from that perspective.
that's right. And you know what's interesting, right? automation or AI period is giving time back to everybody. It's giving time back to everyone to really let them focus on what these insights or recommendations or whatever AI is doing for us, right? It could be mapping our current state notes to a framework, right? Okay, do that mapping for us, save us 1, 2, 3 hours in terms of, okay, mapping it out to NIST or ISO or whatever the compliance requirement is. But now it's giving us time back to really focus on what it means to the business, right? What forward looking business relevant insights may we want. It also allows us to explain the so what. And it allows us to do things that we may not have time to do in the past. And that may be benchmarking operations, right, to peers, or providing additional service back to the business, or using technology a little bit more to like boost our level of assurance. So it really is allowing us to tell a stronger story. And if it's used correctly, and if the function could speak the business speak, it's allowing them to really connect better with the business.
Well said. I think about all of these things and I think about the ask of a chief auditor or even a staff auditor coming into a new function. And to your point, I mean, it's not just backwards looking process where we're looking and at doing a traditional assurance based project and looking back into history. There's just so much that we're asking our folks to look at and do. And I get excited about it because I think it really gives us the opportunity to drive more value. But when you think about the team structure and you think about the skills or attributes of an internal auditor and what they need to look like in order to be a strategic partner versus just sort of a compliance function, what does the IA's got some interesting materials out on this too, but what do you see that as? What does the future auditor look like? What do we need to have skills and attributes and behaviors?
Today's auditor really needs to, I mean, soft skills, the ability to connect with its peers in an organization is more meaningful than ever, right? There's a lot less time needed on with today's technologies, and it's going to be different 6 to 12 months from even today, right? There's going to be a lot more time back to the business to focus on more strategic level, activities and value back to the business. But in today's professional, it's being able to fully grasp technology, right? And all kids out of school and younger professionals, they have that. But it's also the ability to rationalize what the outputs of these technologies mean back to the business, and being able to articulate messaging, value, insights. If you're performing an assessment of a functional area, what does that data mean, right? And being able to articulate that back to management, right? So it's those soft skills that I think they're always valuable, but I think they're paramount now, and a necessary skill for everyone to have. And I mean, everyone has different ways of working and personalities, but if you can effectively communicate, I mean, that is a key skill that everyone should really focus and work on. And again, it could people communicate differently and strongly. People communicate stronger in different ways, and that's fine. But being able to be an effective communicator is totally paramount.
You hit on something that I think is really important that I want to highlight, which is, one of the reasons I get so excited about the advent of AI in this space and our ability to do more. One of the things that makes auditors so powerful within their organization and so impactful is by design, we have to be good at asking questions, right? And we have to have an inquiring mind. And I think to your point, now more than ever, that is so critically important. I would argue that asking the right question, I know when we hire and when we interact with our clients, like sometimes that's the thing they look for the most is like, can we have the right interface and interaction with the customer? And I'd argue to say that also drives really good prompting and AI tools and things like that too. So I mean, the new world and the new skill set, I mean, it's all based on like, do you have the ability to ask the right questions? Whether that's engineering the perfect prompt so AI can assist you, to teasing out data from management, to looking at a set of risks and saying, what are some of these high velocity risks that are changing really rapidly that we have to help evaluate the business on? So Dan, you're spot on. I can't agree more.
I think one point to that, Mike, also is when you can connect to the business, you can relate to them. Doing your job and, providing assurance over a process or, law or whatever it is, technology, providing that level of assurance back and making sure that, policies are incorporated, risk is mitigated. Okay, great, cool. But your insight back and I guess the skill one should have is make sure that you know the business, you can relate to it, and then you can connect the so what of different issues. So you can connect the value of putting a recommendation in place. You tie it to any cost savings or performance or how it's going to really impact its customers. That's a key thing, right? Your management team, and as they should, management so what? But if you relate to it, it could impact your customers because if this isn't in place, you may have whatever it is. You may have a breach or you may have this or whatever that is. If you tie that and you speak and tie it to their strategic objectives, then you're more relatable and your value to the department and to the organization is just elevated when you can speak their speak.
100% agree. Dan, that's really well said. Well, we're just about out of time. I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your perspective with this group. And I think it really delivered a lot of value.
Appreciate you having me on, Mike. I really appreciated this and look forward to doing it again.
Fraud is getting trickier, but you can stay ahead. Join us online for the 2026 Fraud Unmasked virtual conference on February 17th. It's one packed day of practical tips, expert insights, and 13 plus CPEs. So save your spot today and register at theiaa.org. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and rate us. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also catch other episodes on YouTube or at theiaa.org. That's THEIIA.org.